G'day, and welcome to What's Happening in Myanmar, a weekly show from the Frontier Myanmar podcast family. I'm your host, Luke Corbin. At Frontier, we know how hard keeping track of events in Myanmar can be, and in this podcast, I'm joined by journalists and experts to discuss some of the most consequential, convoluted, or just plain interesting stories of the past week. I'm presenting episode 11 today, this Friday, January 17, 2025, and this week I'm joined in the studio by Hka San Lwi, Editor-in-Chief of Kachin Waves, a local media organisation that reports in Burmese and Kachin languages online, on their website and on their Facebook page, with close to 1 million followers. Minglaba, saya Hka San Lwi.
Okay, Minglaba, ကျွန်တော်ကတော့ Kachin Waves ရဲ့ editor Hka San Lwi ပါ
Hello, I'm Hka San Lwi. Thanks for the opportunity to join this podcast.
Saya is more comfortable answering questions in Burmese, so our conversation will feature English translations in the format that you've just heard. We'll be focusing on the campaign for Bhamo by the Kachin Independence Army, or the KIA. But first, let's cover some of the other big news this week. This Tuesday, yet another landslide occurred in the jade mines of Hpakant Township, Kachin State, with dozens confirmed dead and many more still missing. One affected resident told Associated Press that 50 houses were destroyed, and because the landslide hit at night nearby homes, it was particularly deadly. The site of this most recent landslide is in a KIA, Kachin Independence Army, controlled area. Landslides around the jade mines in Hpakant are common and often deadly. They're a consequence of the methods used when mining, deforestation, and a lack of regulation. They usually and disproportionately kill the poor and the desperate people who search through unstable tailings for scrap to sell, as opposed to mining employees or townspeople working in related sectors. The Military State Administration Council, or the SAC, has announced it is banning 7 books for their LGBT content and taking legal action against their publishers. The Ministry of Information claimed, "These books are not accepted by Myanmar society. They are shameless." During the Thein Sein and Aung San Suu Kyi administrations before the 2021 coup, spaces had opened for the LGBT community and pride festivals were held in public. The banning is a reminder that the Burma Buddhist military's discrimination against minorities is not limited to ethnic armed groups and their supporters. The army's conservatism runs deep across many categories in society. And the number of women and girls being trafficked to marry men in China, a country with a large male-to-female population imbalance, has tripled since the 2021 coup, according to the Kachin Women's Association Thailand. It has also become harder to rescue those who are sold into marriage because of conflict along the Yunnan-Myanmar border. The association said this week that women are trafficked for between 10,000 and 50,000 Chinese renminbi each, and those who are rescued can be given shelter at a safe house in Maijiayang on the border. But the best way to address this problem is for Chinese authorities to crack down on the practice. National League for Democracy, or NLD, Central Information Committee member U Nyen Thip said on Friday that the SAC should launch talks after releasing political prisoners, including NLD leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, as a step towards political change. He said this should happen as soon as possible, and that now is an opportune time for the regime to get talks back on track. If Aung San Suu Kyi were to ever be released, it would affect the wider revolution, given her history of non-violence and track record of intermittent negotiation with the Myanmar military, which continues to claim it can and will host an election later this year. Meanwhile, as fighting continues between People's Defence Forces, military-aligned Pew Sortie militias, and military soldiers in Sagaing region, the Home Affairs and Immigration Minister for the Alternative National Unity Government, or NUG, Luin Golap, said this week that the NUG plans to establish a working site for its senior officials in Sagaing. Details were sparse, but only 2 months ago, NUG Acting President Duwalashi La did call on NUG officials living abroad to return to Myanmar. Lwin Lat said the Sagaing hub would reduce delays in decision-making and that the NUG wants new security measures to protect its officials in Sagaing region. He didn't specify where exactly the hub would be, and of course, the whole of Sagaing is very vulnerable to Myanmar military airstrikes. As usual, the Myanmar Air Force has unleashed dozens of airstrikes in the last week, killing at least 30 and injuring at least 40 others. Its targets included amber and gold mines under KIA control in Danai Township, which are close to a former military encampment the KIA took over last year. Another was a Mother's Day ceremony in Sankar village in Hpakant, where at least 10 were killed. And another was Jaudor town, controlled by the Arakan Army, or AA, with Air Force bombs striking administration and police buildings, as well as road infrastructure. Also, Tuku village in Tenanthari Township was hit. The BBC Burmese reported this week that, by their counting, 1,769 civilians were killed by airstrikes in Myanmar in 2024. And the Myanmar military is now treating Sitwe in Rakhine State as its new Western Regional Military Command and has desperately reinforced the town via ship and air since losing its command in Ann Township to the AA. The AA continues to threaten not only Sitwe, but also military positions in Magwe, Bago, and Irrawaddy regions close to Rakhine State, with key towns there being fortified by the regime and soldiers out patrolling the streets. The AA is yet to launch any more major strategic attacks, but sporadic fighting continues, and the SAC is firing artillery at nearby villages from naval vessels and out of their positions in Sitwe. There are also reports of the military torturing civilians for information in Jalpu town and of the SAC detaining dozens of ethnic Rakhine people in areas it does control, like the melting pot of Yangon. Now to the Battle of Bhamo, the riverside town between the dry zone and Myitkyina. The conflict over the town continues to this day, ever since the KIA rushed military locations in Mansi and Bhamo townships early last month. The KIA now controls Mansi, 30 kilometres south of Bhamo by road, as well as the Bhamo airport, and directly threatens that town's military headquarters. Approximately 15,000 residents have reportedly been displaced so far. Just a week ago, on January 10, it was Kachin State Day, a commemoration of the first conference of the Kachin State Council in 1948. Senior General Min Aung Hlaing released a boilerplate statement ignoring the tumult in Bhamo, instead claiming that the SAC is seeking to create a union based on democracy and a federal system, and to ensure eternal peace. Well, I don't know what you think about that statement, Saya Hka San Lwi, but I think now is a good time to discuss the significance of Bhamo. Saya, from your perspective as the editor of a Kachin media news organization, could you please describe the battle for Bhamo so far?
Okay. မန်စီမျိုးသိမ်းတိုက်ပွဲကပထမအကြိမ်ဒီ KIA နဲ့မဟာမိတ်ပူးပေါင်းအဖွဲ့တို့တိုက်တဲ့
So before this campaign, the KIA and some allied resistance groups had already captured the administration buildings in the actual town of Mansi. But there were still military bases like the Light Infantry Battalion 301, 601 and artillery battalions present in the hills and the mountains near the town. So the KIA temporarily suspended its offensive, and it was restraining itself until December 4, when it relaunched offensive in Mansi and Bhamo towns simultaneously. The KIA has now captured Mansi, but it hasn't yet captured Bhamo. And before launching that offensive, the KIA took out the quite significant Light Infantry Battalion 437 base between Momel and Bhamo. During that attack, they also captured other military outposts based in the villages, between Bhamo and Mansi. So it seems the KIA and their allies' strategy was to cut off all the overland logistics routes to Bhamo, and capturing Mansi was the very last part of that. It was only then that they launched the offensive inside Bhamo in earnest. The situation right now is that not only is the KIA attacking Bhamo with all its force alongside allies, but it's also clearing out the leftover soldiers that fled from Mansi before those soldiers get to reach Bhamo. I have to say that If we compare the battle for Bhamo to other successful ones in this revolution, there have already been a lot more casualties this time. We're trying to get accurate information on fatalities and injuries, but it's not easy. Something you need to know also is that Bhamo is a very important town for Kachin people, not only for administration, but militarily and economically. We consider Bhamo to be like a second capital. Militarily, Bhamo is in a strategic location. It has the Operations Military Command 21 in base. It connects Shan and Kachin states, and it connects to Sagaing region via land and waterways. Strategically, there are Chinese investments there on the Irrawaddy River. Because of this importance, the military is really defending the town to a much greater extent than it has for other towns. They're using a lot of drones and airstrikes. But if KIA captures Bhamo, the KIA outposts east of the Irrawaddy River will be safer and more consolidated. And according to analysts, Bhamo is also important for the security of the military's Northern Regional Military Command in Myitkyina.
Thank you, Sayar. As you mentioned, this major battle has been going for like 6 weeks now, and we don't know much about the deaths or the injuries, but we might know something about the challenges that the KIA is facing. So what challenges is the KIA facing?
စင်ခေါ်မှုတစ်ခုကကျွန်တော်တီးထားတဲ့စင်ခေါ်မှုတစ်ခုကဗမော်မြို့ရဲ့ပထဝီအနေထားဆိုတော့ဗမော်မြို့ကမြေပြန့်ဆိုရင်သူက
Yes, one challenge is definitely the geography. Bhamo is on flat land by the river with a lot of lakes and channels, and there are islands between one ward and another. It's tricky to cross these channels, and it's even harder in rainy season. So it's difficult to capture the battalions one after another on a roll. Since Bhamo is a major strategic town, the military aren't letting it go easily. They're using airstrikes and drones constantly, and although the KIA has more military firepower, artillery and weapons now, they lack more advanced firepower to shoot down aircraft. That's a major challenge. But no matter how many challenges there are, resistance groups have really evolved a lot and are quite advanced compared to the past. I believe that the KIA will capture Bhamo. The thing is, it's simply a must-capture town for the KIA and other resistance groups. They'll take control of it no matter the losses. And I believe it won't be too long. Once the KIA has Bhamo, they can cut off military reinforcements coming to Kachin State via the Irrawaddy River and via land from Sagaing. Resistance groups will then only have to worry about airstrikes. So this battle is crucial, not only for Kachin State, but also for resistance offensive in Sagaing, Magwe and Mandalay regions.
Okay, so that gives us a great overview of the battle. And you've given a very firm endorsement of the KIA's chances at eventually succeeding. But can the KIA hold the city? Given the Myanmar military's control of the skies and the fact that many civilians in the city don't necessarily identify as Jingpo or Kachin either. So what about the long game of administrating Bhamo?
ဒီမေကွန်းကတော့ဒီအခုနိုင်ငံရေးအရာရေးကြီးတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့စဉ်းစားချက်တစ်ခုဖြစ်မယ်လို့
This question is really important. Anti-coup resistance groups have one uniting objective, which is that the military shall not rule. I think the SAC also employs the same kind of rule, ensuring resistance groups do not rule either. Based on the patterns of airstrikes in newly liberated areas, or whatever you want to call them, the SAC won't let anyone rule in peace and calm. That's simply the political goal behind the military's actions. They say, you can capture areas, but you won't be able to govern them. Civilians, you might think you're in a liberated area, but we'll make sure you won't be able to live there in peace. In resistance-controlled areas like Bhamo, it's crucial that there are no conflicts between local people. Neighbouring countries and the international community pay attention to conflicts between local people and resistance groups. The international community really interrogates the ability of resistance groups to govern their areas. Ideally, resistance groups should be able to live in harmony and synchronize with local people. Of course, the threat of airstrikes is a challenge, but resistance groups governing areas in a way that is collaborative with local people is just as important politically.
Thank you, Sia. Now, taking a breath out from Bhamo, can I speedily remind you, our audience, the listeners, that Frontier Myanmar has a membership program. Frontier's feature stories and this podcast, they are free, but Frontier also has in-person events, daily newsletters, and bi-weekly political analysis pieces that you can access with a monthly or annual subscription. So go to frontiermyanmar.net/membership for all those details, if you aren't a member already. If you are, thank you so much. Now, back to Sayar. Our next question and last question, Sayar, can you tell us more about Bhamo's cultural, historical value to the Kachin people? And, how you think this collaborative approach you've mentioned to governance would work?
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ဗမောမျိုးကျွန်တော်လေးလာသိရှိထားသလောက်တော့ဗမောမျိုးကတော့
From my experience, I would say that Bhamo is a prestigious town with historical significance. For Kachin people, it's not only strategic militarily, but it's renowned for the growth of Christianity for our people. The Bhamo region is the origin of the modern administration and education of Kachin people. For example, the Sinlom School, which lies between Lomao and Wegyo, is the first high school to be led by Kachin people. Those educated there went on to become Kachin political and military leaders. For example, the first principal of the Mainyo Pinuluin Military Academy was Dua Kun Maung, who went to the Sinlon School. During World War II, Bhamo was a strategic vocation in resisting Japanese imperialism. After we kicked out the Japanese, we Kachin celebrated a victory, the Nor Festival, in Bhamo. So, while the Burmese military has been present in Bhamo since 1948's independence, it's still an important town for the Kachin. And another thing is the Kachin people traditionally live in mountainous areas. During the time of the Burma monarchy, they could administrate Kachin communities only partly. They weren't able to control us entirely. The Kachin Dua chiefs also influenced other communities living in the nearby lowlands. Bhamo was a town with tributary relations with both the Chinese and Burma empires. As far as I'm aware, in history, there's never been a major conflict between Shan and Kachin peoples without being provoked by the efforts of external actors. Right now, the KIA controls more urban areas than before, like the towns in the old Kachin Special Region 1. If Bhamo, Waimor and Shwegu are also captured by the KIA, then they might need a strategy to keep governance harmonious between different communities. But I don't think there will be any conflict without efforts at manipulation by outside forces. Some make the point that Kachin state is big, but the Kachin population is small. But Kachin people believe they need to have a stake in these and surrounding areas because generations of Kachin people have fought for them with their blood and sweat. There's a tradition of defending the adjoining lands, and even though we Kachin live in the mountains, we go and fight against imperialists everywhere. So Kachin feel like they have some sense of belonging and political authority across this whole area. The way I understand it is that this is the reason why Bhamo and Monyin were added to Kachin state during the Panong discussions with General Aung San. The Kachin people gained political rights for defending and protecting the land, and the Sham princes also recognized this in history. So, if this is acknowledged and the KIA's administration is harmonious but practical, then I don't think there will be any problems between different communities under their rule, at least without external manipulation.
Indeed. Well, let's hope for the best there. And I really want to give a huge and special thank you to you, Sayar, for coming on What's Happening in Myanmar and giving us your Kachin perspective as a local journalist on the ongoing battle for Bhamo. Really, really interesting, and appreciate your time so much. So thank you.
No, thank you for all your questions, and that translator also thank you. The podcast season အတွက်မေးခဲ့တဲ့မေးခွန်းတွေကို
Thank you for the opportunity to answer all the questions related to Bhamo.
And thanks back to everyone listening. And remember, you can reach out to the show via the email address whimyanmar@proton.me. ME. We would love to hear from you, especially if you would like to hear more Burmese language guests on the show through translation. Until next week, check out the latest feature story published yesterday on the Frontier Myanmar website. It's all about the hard grind that millions of Myanmar people endure as they try to stay legal, sheltering, living, working and studying in Thailand. It's a great read and well worth your time. Again, until next week, let me say farewell and take care.